Neuroscience supports this understanding. The pursuit of supply activates dopamine pathways associated with reward anticipation, novelty seeking, and reinforcement learning. Every successful extraction of admiration, compliance, or emotional reaction produces a neurochemical reward similar to the reward spike seen in gambling, social media addiction, or stimulant use. The relief does not last long. The dopamine crash creates anxiety, irritability, emptiness, and restlessness. This drives the narcissist back into the chase. The cycle repeats, strengthening the neural loop. Over time, tolerance builds. What once satisfied them becomes insufficient. They need more intensity, more control, more admiration, more drama, more emotional charge to achieve the same psychological effect. Deadly supply. The hidden addiction. Behind narcissistic chasing is not merely a dramatic phrase meant to provoke curiosity or emotional reaction. It is an accurate metaphor for a psychological mechanism that functions with the same compulsive force, neurological reinforcement, and destructive trajectory as chemical addiction. When people encounter a narcissist in intimate relationships, friendships, families, or workplaces, they often struggle to understand the relentless hunger behind the narcissist's pursuit of admiration, control, validation, attention, and emotional reactions. On the surface, it can look like arrogance, cruelty, selfishness, or emotional immaturity. Beneath the surface, however, lies a fragile internal system that depends on external regulation to survive psychologically. The narcissist does not simply want admiration. They need it in the same way a starving body needs food or an addicted brain needs its next dose. To understand why narcissistic chasing feels so relentless, one must first grasp the concept of supply as emotional fuel. Supply is any form of attention that confirms the narcissist's sense of importance, power, superiority, desirability, or control. Praise, fear, loyalty, jealousy, dependency, obedience, admiration, even conflict and suffering can function as supply if it makes the narcissist feel significant. The brain of a narcissist learns early in life that internal emotional regulation is unsafe, unavailable, or insufficient. Instead of building stable self-worth internally, the nervous system wires itself to seek regulation externally. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic, unconscious, and compulsive. Neuroscience supports this understanding. The pursuit of supply activates dopamine pathways associated with reward anticipation, novelty seeking, and reinforcement learning. Every successful extraction of admiration, compliance, or emotional reaction produces a neurochemical reward similar to the reward spike seen in gambling, social media addiction, or stimulant use. The relief does not last long. The dopamine crash creates anxiety, irritability, emptiness, and restlessness. This drives the narcissist back into the chase. The cycle repeats, strengthening the neural loop. Over time, tolerance builds. What once satisfied them becomes insufficient. They need more intensity, more control, more admiration, more drama, more emotional charge to achieve the same psychological effect. This is why narcissistic relationships often escalate. What begins as charm, love bombing, generosity, or intense connection gradually transforms into control, criticism, manipulation, emotional withdrawal, triangulation, and cruelty. The narcissist is not consciously plotting evil in most cases. They are chasing regulation. When supply flows easily, they may appear loving and charismatic. When supply weakens, their nervous system enters threat mode. Fear of abandonment, shame, powerlessness, and inner emptiness surge beneath the surface. Instead of feeling those emotions directly, the narcissist externalizes them onto others. They provoke reactions, create conflict, or assert dominance to restore their sense of control and stimulation. The addiction metaphor becomes even clearer when we examine the withdrawal state. When a narcissist loses access to a primary source of supply, whether through rejection, boundaries, indifference, or exposure, they often experience symptoms resembling withdrawal. Agitation, obsessive rumination, rage, depression, emptiness, panic, and desperation. their identity feels unstable. Their sense of self collapses without external validation. This can trigger frantic attempts to regain the source or quickly secure a replacement. They may stalk, hoover, manipulate mutual contacts, fabricate crises, rewrite history, or suddenly appear remorseful or loving. The goal is not repair or accountability. The goal is re-stimulation of the supply circuit. The tragedy is that no amount of supply ever truly satisfies. The internal emptiness remains. The relief is temporary. Each hit reinforces dependency while deepening the underlying deficit. Over years or decades, many narcissists become increasingly rigid, paranoid, emotionally volatile, and disconnected from authentic intimacy. Their world narrows into a hunting ground for emotional resources rather than a shared human landscape of mutuality and vulnerability. Relationships become transactional. People become instruments rather than individuals. For those entangled with a narcissist, this dynamic creates confusion and trauma bonding. The intermittent reinforcement pattern mirrors addiction in the partner as well. Periods of warmth, validation, or connection are followed by devaluation, withdrawal, or cruelty. The nervous system becomes conditioned to chase the highs and tolerate the lows. Hope becomes entangled with suffering. The partner may mistake intensity for love, chaos for passion, and control for protection. Over time, self-esteem erodes, boundaries weaken, reality becomes distorted. The narcissist's emotional hunger consumes the relational space. One of the most dangerous aspects of this addiction is how well it disguises itself as confidence and strength. Narcissists often appear powerful, decisive, charismatic, successful, or dominant. Internally, however, their emotional architecture is fragile and defensive. They cannot tolerate ordinary human vulnerability without experiencing it as humiliation or annihilation. They must remain superior, special, admired, or feared to maintain psychological stability. This creates a brittle identity that cannot flex, self-reflect, or emotionally repair. Any perceived criticism or loss of control triggers defensive reactions that can range from silent withdrawal to explosive rage. The chasing behavior also explains why narcissists often jump rapidly from one relationship, project, identity, or environment to another. Novelty produces stronger dopamine activation than familiarity. New people have not yet seen behind the mask. New environments offer fresh opportunities for admiration and control. The narcissist often reinvents themselves, adopting new personas, values, or narratives to maximize appeal and dominance. This constant reinvention prevents deep integration of identity. The self remains fragmented and externally anchored. It is important to clarify that not all narcissistic traits imply full personality disorder or malicious intent. Narcissism exists on a spectrum. Many individuals develop narcissistic adaptations as survival strategies in emotionally unsafe environments. Emotional neglect, inconsistent caregiving, conditional love, excessive criticism, or enmeshment can all contribute to externalized self-regulation patterns. However, when these patterns become rigid, compulsive, and exploitative, they cause real harm to both the individual and those around them. Healing from narcissistic addiction requires more than insight or willpower. The nervous system itself must learn new regulatory pathways. This involves developing tolerance for vulnerability, learning to self-soothe, building internal self-worth, and confronting deep shame without defensive collapse. For individuals with entrenched narcissistic structures, this process is extremely difficult and often resisted. The addiction protects them from confronting painful internal realities. Without genuine motivation and long-term therapeutic work, the cycle tends to persist. For survivors and partners, the most important shift is understanding that the narcissist's behavior is not caused by your inadequacy, failure, or responsibility. You were never the supply itself. You were the stimulus. The addiction would exist regardless of who occupied the role. This understanding helps dissolve self-blame and unrealistic hope. You cannot heal someone's nervous system through sacrifice, patience, or love alone. You cannot outgive an addiction. Breaking free often involves detoxing from the trauma bond as well. The nervous system must recalibrate to safety, consistency, and emotional neutrality. This can feel boring, empty, or unfamiliar at first. Peace may initially feel like loss rather than relief. Over time, however, the body learns stability. Identity rebuilds, boundaries strengthen, self-trust returns. Clarity replaces confusion. The emotional fog lifts. The phrase deadly supply is not hyperbole. While narcissistic chasing may not always manifest as physical danger, it can erode mental health, identity, financial stability, social networks, and long-term well-being. Chronic stress exposure alters brain function, immune response, and emotional regulation. Many survivors report anxiety disorders, depression, complex trauma symptoms, and loss of self-concept after prolonged exposure. The cost is real and measurable. Yet there is also an empowering truth embedded in understanding this addiction. Once you see the pattern clearly, its predictability becomes apparent. The charm, the escalation, the control, the devaluation, the withdrawal, the replacement, the hoovering, the repetition. The cycle does not evolve into mutual growth or emotional maturity unless the individual fundamentally restructures their internal regulation system. Recognizing this protects you from false hope and recycled narratives. Awareness also restores agency. You can choose disengagement rather than participation in the supply economy. You can reclaim emotional sovereignty. You can invest in relationships that are reciprocal, stable, and grounded in mutual respect rather than emotional extraction. You can rebuild your nervous system around safety rather than volatility. You can learn to recognize early warning signs and trust your intuition rather than override it with rationalizations. Ultimately, narcissistic chasing is not driven by love, connection, or intimacy. It is driven by regulation, dominance, and avoidance of inner emptiness. The addiction masks itself as desire, ambition, confidence, or destiny, but its core is dependency. Understanding this distinction changes everything. It shifts the narrative from personal failure to systemic pattern. It reframes the chaos as neurobehavioral conditioning rather than mysterious cruelty. It returns clarity where confusion once ruled. The hidden addiction behind narcissistic chasing reveals a profound human paradox. The more desperately one avoids vulnerability and internal emptiness, the more enslaved one becomes to external stimulation and control. The more power one seeks externally, the less freedom one possesses internally. The more admiration one demands, the less authentic connection one experiences. The chase never ends because the destination does not exist. Real strength is not domination. It is emotional integration. Real confidence is not superiority. It is self-trust. Real intimacy is not control. It is mutual presence. When these truths become embodied rather than intellectual, the spell of narcissistic supply begins to lose its grip, both for those who chase and those who escape the chase.